Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Western Canon Challenge, where we are reading the entirety of the Western Literary Canon out loud. Today we are moving on to journal collection number 44, and this dates from the year 1853. Emerson will turn 50 in this year. And as always, the beginning of the journal collections usually have a sort of biographical update from the editors, and this is no different, so I will go ahead and read that. During the first week in January, Mr. Emerson gave a course on the conduct of life before the Mercantile Library Association in New York, then lectured in the leading cities of Ohio and Illinois, and gave a course in St. Louis. The Anglo-American was one of the lectures. The rest of January was occupied with lectures in Philadelphia and in western towns. See an amusing account of these experiences in his letter to Carlyle, Correspondence, Volume 2, page 218. End of note. Then there is a French quotation, and it is not given any translation, so I will skip over it. January. English poetry. Yet it is fair, is it not, to say that the ideal of any people is in their best writers, sculptors, painters, and builders, in their greatest heroes and creators, in any and every kind. In Hamlet, in Othello, and Coriolanus, in Troilus and Cressida, we shall pick up the scattered bones of the English Osiris as they haunted the mind of the greatest poet of the world, and he was English. But we pause expectant before the genius of Shakespeare, as if his biography were not yet written, and cannot be written until the problem of the whole English race is solved. The English genius never parts with its materialistic tendency, and even in its inspirations is materialistic. Milton, Shakespeare, Chaucer, Spenser, Herbert, who have carried it to its greatest height, are bound to satisfy the senses and the understanding as well as the reason. If the question is asked whether the English repudiate thought, we remember there is always a minority in England who entertain whatever speculations the highest muse has attempted. No brain has dallied with the finer imaginings than Shakespeare, yet with mathematical accuracy. No richer thoughted man than Bacon, no holier than Milton or Herbert. We have found English for Behmen, and English for Swedenborg, and readers for both. Yet when I think of the robust Greek mythology and what a cosmic imagination, I wish to say astronomic imagination, they had, a power, I mean, of expressing in graceful fable the laws of the world, so that the mythology is beautiful poetry on one side, at any moment convertible into severe science on the other, then the English verse looks poor and purposeless, as if written for hire, and not obeying the grandeur of ideas. I find or fancy more true poetry, the love of the vast in the Welsh and bardic fragments of Taliesin and his school, than in a good many volumes of the British classics. It is curious that Thomas Taylor, the Platonist, is really a better man of imagination, a better poet than any writer between Milton and Wordsworth. He was a poet with a poet's life and aims. For poetry, Ossian had superiorities over Dryden and Pope, but though seizing in poetry of storms and of the rude British landscape and the sentiment as they had never seen it, yet wanting every other gift, wanting their knowledge of the world, their understanding, their wit, their literature, he made no figure but a ridiculous one in the hands of men of letters. Results. If at this moment a question is asked, who answers it? England. If telegraphs, if trade, if geology, if mesmeric rappings, if sea serpents, if Payne's light, if Ericsson's caloric engine, if the balloon, if a pauper system, if gold and silver currency must have their question answered, which way do men look? To Paris, to New York, or to London for the final reply? Where is Faraday? Where is Owen? Where is Hume? Where is Stevenson? And Brunel, and Wheatstone, and Gray, and Ricardo, and Paxton? Where are the Barings and Rothschild? stand by your order. We must sympathize over all our cavils at their faults or vices, with Geoffrey, with Macaulay, with Dickens, and the whole class of wits. We understand their means and success. They are the same with our own. Their cause is ours, and from Plato, Shakespeare, and Bacon down to the last writer of a leader in the London Times, whenever the intellect tells on the public and is recognized as a power in the world, all the scholars in the world share the benefit. It is a bitter satire on our social order, just at present, for example, the plight of Mr. Alcott, the most refined and most advanced soul we have had in New England, who makes all other souls appear slow and cheap and mechanical, a man of such a courtesy and greatness, that in conversation all others, even the intellectual, seem sharp and fighting for victory, and angry. He has the unalterable sweetness of a muse. Yet because he cannot earn money by his pen or his talk, or by school keeping or book keeping or editing or any kind of meanness, nay, for this very cause that he is ahead of his contemporaries, is higher than they, and keeps himself out of the shop condescensions and smug arts which they stoop to, or unhappily need not stoop to, but find themselves, as it were, born to. Therefore it is the unanimous opinion of New England judges that this man must die. We shall all hear of his death with pleasure, and feel relieved that his board and clothes are saved. We do not adjudge him to hemlock or to garroting. We are much too hypocritical for that. But we not the less surely doom him by refusing to protect against this doom, or combine to save him, and to set him on employments fit for him and salutary to the state, or to the senate of fine souls, which is the heart of the state. And Boston is no company for a fine wit. There is a certain poor smell in all the streets, in Beacon Street and Park and Mount Vernon, as well as the lawyers' offices and wharves, and the same meanness and sterility, and leave all hope behind, as one finds in a boot manufacturer's premises, or a bonnet factory, vamps, pasteboard, millinet, and an eye to profit. The want of elevation, the absence of ideas, the sovereignty of the abdomen reduces all to the same poorness. One fancies that in the houses of the rich, as the temptation to servility is removed, there may chance to be generosity and elevation, but no, we send them to Congress, and they originate nothing, and, on whatsoever question, they instantly exhibit the vulgarity of the lowest populace, an absence of all perception and natural equity. They have no opinions, and cringe to their own attorney when he tells the opinion of the insurance offices. But you can never have a high aristocracy without real elevation of ideas somewhere. Otherwise, as in Boston, it turns out punk and cheat at last. I wrote that England goes for trade, not for liberty. Goes against Hungary, against Schleswig-Holstein, against French Republic. Yes, that is the stern edict of Providence, that liberty shall be no hasty fruit. Certainly I go for culture, and not for multitudes. 'Tis very costly, this thinking for the market in books or lectures. As soon as any one turns the conversation on my representative men, for instance, I am instantly sensible that there is nothing there for conversation, that the argument is all pinched and illiberal and popular. Only what is private and yours and essential should ever be printed or spoken. I will buy the suppressed part of the author's mind. You are welcome to all he published. England yields men and opportunities of grandeur. The tone of Napoleon's, of Charlemagne, of Charles V, of absolute power reaching to interests of vast masses of men, when it falls into the hands of good sense and good will, is eminently humane. And the English system, which forces great merit up into the great place, and relieves it of all nonsense on the way, by searching school of parliament and parties and armed interests that will not be trifled with, when it meets with a good natural statesman, enables him easily to take this right royal tone. Both the Pitts were of an imperial nature, Fox and Burke, and severally great abilities. Mr. Canning is on the whole the best example of manly attitude, or of a nearly absolute power wielded by hands able to hold it. Peel again of heavy parts by slow growth, and with the mediocrity of a dull boy reached at a last a certain grandeur by honesty, courage, and industry, and Wellington by his native sagacity, and the unwearied application of his logic, alike to large and small things, and his veracity and honor, came to be the pillar on which for the time English institutions rested. Editor's note. Here follow quotations from Canning and Lord Brougham, and from Napoleon. End note. The sea serpent may have an instinct to retire into the depths of the sea when about to die, and so leave no bones on the shore for naturalists. The sea serpent is afraid of Mr. Owen, but his heart sunk within him when at last he heard that Barnum was born. The Saxon and Norse poetry are warm with the faith and sentiment of the time, and the verbs are solid as church walls. The religion, to be sure, wrote the chronicles, but the people believed the religion, which was alive, and served them, freed the serf, defended women, and allowed a mediation in poor man's friend in the ecclesiastical power. The poetry is imaginative, and the churches are great and poetic. Look at theirs, and look at ours. Quote, God himself cannot procure good for the wicked, Welsh Triad, Davies. Troilus and Cressida contains many of those sentences which have procured a fame for Shakespeare quite independent of his dramatic genius, and which in their clear and disengaged sentences, their universal aptness, imply the widest knowledge of men, and one would say such experience and such easy command as only courts and intimate knowledge of affairs and habits of command could bestow. It requires the habits of Leicester and Essex, of Burleigh and Buckingham, to speak the expressed essence of life in so large and so easy a phrase. It is Wellington's merit that he feels his personal superiority from the first, sees good-humoredly and patiently all the attacks and even the victories of the enemy, and the firm assurance that the enemy proceeds on a lower principle than himself. He sees the French military science to be vain and ostentatious, sees their object to be egoistic, and therefore their whole tactic unsteady and heartless, and sure to fall into some error somewhere, by which they will certainly become his prey. Wellington traces his success to his perception, in spite of the assertions of his guides, that where two towns lay exactly opposite each other on a river, there must be a ferry or a ford, probably the ford. He pushed for the river and found one, and marched his army across. February, with a question mark. The merit claimed for the Anglican Church is that if you let it alone, it will let you alone. It moves through a zodiac of feasts, and has dearly coupled itself with the almanac. At Candlemas Day, half your roots and half your hay. Hence its strength in the agricultural districts. Quote, the established clergy have long been as they contrive to be the principal bulwark against barbarism, and the link which unites the sequestered peasants with the intellectual advancement of the age. Wordsworth. The power of the established church consists in its disconnection from all other countries. 'Tis said that the discovery of Milton's Arianism in this rigid generation has already impaired the sale of Paradise Lost. Hallam. Quote, this sea is so slow that it is almost immovable, and thought of many to be the bounds which compass in the whole world, because the sun continueth so clear and bright from the setting unto the rising, that it darkeneth the stars, and some are persuaded that the sound of the sun is there heard, as he riseth out of the sea, and that the beams of his head are there seen, as also many shapes of gods, and that there was the end of nature and the world. Verstegen, Page 34, translation from Tacitus, De Moribus Germanae. Quote, Noah begat Japheth, Japheth begat Gomer, Gomer begat Essens, or Asina, Asina begat Tusco, the father and conductor of the Tusht, or Germans, out of Asia into Europe, end quote. Verstegen, page 9. The English have always been rich, but their immense power is recent. It is only now just that the old oak has blossomed out into such immoderate growth as we see. It is one of the maxims of political economy that all the wealth that exists was created within the last 12 months. But England, working long on the problem of her mines and her textile arts, at length produced her Marquis of Worcester, her Watt, Hargraves, Arkwright, and Crompton, and by means of steam gave the immense expansion to her arts. 'Tis wonderful how new all is. The iron plough was new in the 18th century, the cast iron plough in the 19th. 2 centuries ago, all sawing of timber was done by hand, and hence the extreme cost of building with wood. Steam gave the whole value to the force pumps and the power looms. America. One of the East India Company's vessels is a year and a half in making the voyage out to Calcutta and home, which an American performs in 9 months, and it costs the company just twice as much to export a cargo of coffee from Mocha to the Mediterranean as it does an American merchant, namely 30,000 pounds versus 15,000 pounds. Spence. End of May with a question mark. Yesterday a ride to Bedford with Ellery along the Bedford levels, and walked all over the premises of the old mill, King Philip's Mill, on the Shawsheen River, old mill with sundry nondescript wooden antiquities. Boys with bare legs were fishing on the little islet in the stream. We crossed and recrossed, saw the fine stump of trees, rocks and grove, and many callet views of the bare legs. Beautiful pastoral country, but needs sunshine. There were millions of light today, so all went well, all but the dismal tidings which knelled a funeral bell through the whole afternoon in the death of Susan Sturgis. Rich democratic land of Massachusetts, in every house well-dressed women with air of town ladies, in every house a clavecin and a copy of the Spectator, and some young lady a reader of Willis. Lentera did not like the landscape. Too many leaves. One leaf is like another leaf, and apt to be agitated by east wind. On the other hand, quote-unquote Professor, that being Ellery's dog, did. He strode gravely as a bear through all the sentimental parts, and fitted equally well the grave and the gay scenes. He has a stroke of humor in his eye, as if he enjoyed his master's jokes. Ellery thinks, quote, England a flash in the pan, end quote, as English people in 1848 had agreed that, quote, Egypt was humbug, end quote. I am to put down among the monomaniacs the English agriculturalist, who only knows one revolution in political history, the rape culture. But as we rode, one thing was clear, as oft before, that it is favorable to sanity, the occasional change of landscape. If a girl is mad to marry, let her take a ride of 10 miles and see meadows and mountains she never saw before, 2 villages and an old mansion house, and the odds are it will change all her resolutions. World is full of fools who get a going and never stop. Set them off on another tack, and they are half cured. From Shawsheen we went to Burlington, and Ellery reiterated his conviction that the only art in the world is landscape painting. The boys held up their fish to us from afar. A broad new placard on the walls announced to us that Shawsheen Mill was for sale, but we bought neither the fish nor the mill. Channing told Mr. Edmund Hosmer, quote, that he did not see but trouble was as good as anything else if you only have enough of it, end quote. Swedenborg taught, quote, that the evil spirits in the hells have all the enjoyment of which they are capable, end quote. Sea. Alcuin called the sea the road of the bold, the hostelry of the rivers, and the source of the rains. The sea was the road of the bold, frontier of the wheat-sown plains, the pit wherein all rivers rolled, and fountain of the rains. Of the ship, she looked into a port, and seeing nothing there, went on. June 14th. I went to Mackay's shipyard and saw the King of the Clippers on the stocks. Length of the keel, 285 feet. Breadth of the beam, 50 feet. Carries 1,500 tons, more than the Sovereign of the Seas. Will be finished in August. In political economy, all capital is new, the fruit of the last year or two. Waste England, waste France, Belgium. Raise every city and town. In a year or two there is just as much wheat and hay as many animals, tools, barns, cloths, coaches, palaces, and ice cream, as much revenue as before. Counterpart of statement above, 3 or 4 days of rain reduce hundreds to starvation in London. English race must be a mean or mixture, for everything in that island is. And this result which constitutes so much of the joy of life, of agreeable relief or contrast in the colors, sounds, savors, and forms, is never so magnificent in effect as in the marriage of complementary qualities of mind and character in individuals, wherein the powers of one family are reinforced by the addition of a new class of powers from another. Nature has a chemistry of her own, by which she can mix as well as make. Henry Thoreau is military. He seemed stubborn and implacable, always manly and wise, but rarely sweet. One would say that, as Webster could never speak without an antagonist, so Henry does not feel himself except in opposition. He wants a fallacy to expose, a blunder to pillory, requires a little sense of victory, a roll of the drums to call his powers into full exercise. Editor's note: Arthur Hugh Clow, the poet and scholar, probably encouraged by Mr. Emerson in his purpose of finding a field for his proper work, and even a home here, landed in America in the late autumn of 1852. He was cordially welcomed in Concord, in Boston, and in Cambridge, where he went into lodgings and tutored youth, lectured or wrote for the North American and Putnam's Magazine, as opportunity offered. A few days after landing he wrote, quote, "Emerson carries me off to Concord," and next day, Sunday, November 14th, quote, "Loads of talk with Emerson all morning. Walk with him to a wood with a prettyish pool, Walden. 6:30 tea, and Mr. Thoreau, and presently Mrs. Ellery Channing, sister of Margaret Fuller, and others. I had abolition pretty well out with Emerson, with whom one can talk with pleasure on the subject. His view was in the direction of purchasing emancipation." Again, November 21st, quote, "Emerson gave a grand dinner in honor of my poor self, apparently, at the Tremont House, where were Longfellow, Hawthorne, Greenough, the sculptor, Charles Sumner, Theodore Parker, Ellery Channing, Lowell, and 5 others. A very swell dinner, I assure you." Clow thinks that there is a stream of tradition in families and men in England that you can draw more from than from people in a new country. It does not come out at once. They are slow to speak, and when they speak, it means something. Stands for a great deal that has been done. When you talk with people in this country, the climate stimulates them to talk, but you soon come to the end of all they know. In Belgium and in other countries I have seen reports of model farms. They begun with downs or running sands. It makes no difference what bottom, mere land to lay off their basket of loam down upon. Then they proceed from beach grass or whatever, and rye and clover, manuring all the time until they formed a soil 14 inches deep. Well, so I conceive it is in national genericulture as in agriculture. You must manage to set up a national will. You must find a land like England, where temperate and sharp northern breezes blow, to keep that will alive and alert. Markets on every possible side, because it is an island, the people tasked and kept at the top of their condition by the continual activity of seafaring and the exciting nature of sea risks, and the deep stimulus of gain. The land not large enough, the population not large enough, to glut the market and depress one another, but so proportioned is it to the size of Europe and of the world that it keeps itself healthy and bright, and like an immense manufactory it yields, with perfect security and ease, incredible results. Many things conduce to this. Over them all works a sort of anima mundi, or soul of the island, the aggregation by time, experience, and demand and supply of a great many personalities, which fits them to each other, and enables them to keep step and time, cooperate as harmoniously and punctually as parts of the human body. Thierry's History of the Norman Conquest is written, I suspect, for the sake of blazoning its motto, and in some manner avenging the field of Waterloo and the other humblings of France before England. The conclusion of the book certainly warrants this suspicion, and I observe that in the chapter referring to Henry V's wars, Poitiers and Agincourt are not even named, whilst the Battle of Castellon is exactly specified, page 257. The motto with which the book begins and ends is from Robert of Gloucester as follows: The folk of Normandy, that among us wonneth yet and sculleth evermo', of the Normans beth thys hae men, that beth of thys lond, and the low men of Saxons. He is delighted in finding the Normans called Franci in old documents, quote, sworn to by all the French and all the English called villains villainy, end quote. Sylvan could go wherever woods and waters were, and no man was asked for leave. Once or twice the farmer withstood, but it was to no purpose. He could as easily prevent the sparrows or tortoises. It was their land before it was his, and their title was precedent. Sylvan knew what was on their land, and they did not, and he sometimes brought them to ostentatious gifts of flowers or fruits or shrubs which they would gladly have paid great prices for, and did not tell them that he took them from their own woods. Moreover, the very time at which he used their land and water, for his boat glided like a trout everywhere unseen, was in hours when they were sound asleep. Long before they were awake, he went up and down to survey like a sovereign his possessions, and he passed onward and left them before the farmer came out of doors. Indeed, it was the common opinion of the day that Mr. Thoreau made Concord. Ellery affirms that Adams, the cabinet-maker, has a true artistic eye, for he is always measuring with his eye the man he talks with for his coffin. At Nahant, the eternal play of the sea seems the anti-clock or destroyer of the memory of time, and reminds me of what I have once heard, that the sea perpetually invading inch by inch the continents, rising, say, on the eastern shore of each continent, an inch in a century, wears off and consumes all the monuments of civility and of man. All day the waves assailed the rock. I heard no church bells chime. The sea beat scorns the minster clock, and breaks the glass of time. Here follows a short Latin quotation here, which is not given any translation. I knew well the indigence of nature, which usually starves one faculty when another is to be enriched. It is the too well-known poesy of the best natures, these compensatory glories. Alfred. There is a passage in Asser's Life, page 76, giving a certain emphasis to a single sentence, which was read or said to Alfred by Asser, and this sentence and others like it were to be written, which exhibits the right instinct of education, the feeling of joy and hope that in certain moments enshrines a thought and draws a whole pantheon out of it. English talent is working talent. It is like oak and pine among fancy trees, and like iron among the metals, bismuth, nickel, iridium, seen only in laboratories. A better model of a steamboat or a clipper, a new channel of trade, a new engine, a bounty to fish, a law that abolishes tolls and fees at a port, changes the navigation of the world, and upsets a nobility and a nation. A new article of commerce, like guano, a ship canal, leaves Amsterdams and Londons to rot with the Tyres and Siddons and Venices of the past. I admire answers to which no answer can be made. Quote, the masters of slaves seem generally anxious to prove that they are not of a race superior in any noble quality to the meanest of their bondmen. Mackintosh, History of England, 1, page 321. This is the end of Part 1 of Emerson's journal collection, number 44, dating from the year 1853, when the author was 50 years old. Thank you for listening.